Hello there, Seamus.
Well, hi, Pierce.
Well, we're here again, and we're not alone this time.
Again, not alone. We have a wonderful guest from all the way across the pond in Canada this time, believe it or not. Hello, Maddie.
How's it going, boys?
Not too bad at all, sir. Would you like to give our good listeners a little bit of details about yourself, some background, perhaps?
Well, I've been podcasting for the last year. Our show is called Semi-Intellectual Musings. Interesting. Americans pronounce it semi-intellectual musings, and
So
it
they
always
pronounce
gets.
it wrong? Is it?
I mean, we're proud former British colony. So yes, of course they pronounce it incorrectly. Of course we speak the proper Queen's English.
God
here
save
in
the
Canada.
Queen.
Yeah, God save the Queen. Throw an extra U in it, boys. So yeah, our show is we started in May of last year, 2017, I guess that is. And it's a social science, arts and humanities podcast that, like, our tagline is, we try not to take ourselves too seriously, but we take our topics pretty seriously in terms of the research that goes behind it. So we've done episodes on, like, a trip I took to a hockey exhibit at a museum, and then another episode on hockey cards. So it's very cliche. We've done a couple of episodes on hockey, but we also
talking about hockey.
yeah, surprise,
I've never heard of
surprise,
this before.
surprise. And then we've done a few episodes on Phil, my co-host research. So he does sociology, and I'm the anthropologist. And we've done a couple more on mine. So Phil's research is on the concept of resilience, and he applies it to historical sociology perspective. So he looks at how the concept or the meaning behind the concept has morphed through time and been applied in different ways. And then my research, when I was at university, and we could talk about that if you like, all the way up to the doctorate level, I was researching post-concussion syndrome with athletes and medical professionals who treat athletes with concussions, and that was from a medical anthropology perspective. So there you go.
Wow. And if anybody hasn't checked out the podcast, do. It's Semi-Intellectual Musings. It's on Podbean. Is it on iTunes?
Oh yeah, right. Our I'm so bad at promoting, boys. Our website is something like thesim.podbean.com. You can find our podcast by typing in Semi-Intellectual Musings anywhere you find your podcast, I suppose. And also, we always look for topics for the show, so you can email the show at semiintellectual@gmail.com. And our Facebook is at the SimPod, and our Twitter is at _SIM_POD.
Well,
Perfect.
Cool. So, in the vein of intellectualism, that's what we're going to talk about today.
We're going to nerd out on being nerds.
No, a lovely little segue into that right there. It didn't really go too far for me to think of that topic, right? Intellectualism, semi-intellectual musings.
I put the semi-intellectual musings.
I mean, you were literally just talking about going to doctorate level there, but whatever. All right,
I had a blast all the way.
Yeah, so I guess the idea here is even it might be kind of similar to what you're talking about, like both of your areas of research. I guess we might as well start off by talking about the very concept of intelligence, and it's first of all, I guess how intelligence has been viewed throughout history would be a good place to start, but also just your opinion on how intelligence emerges, what exactly is intelligence, how we define it, all that kind of stuff.
So, like, I would say the kind of textbook answer to that would be, they would point to the development of the IQ test, the intelligence quota test, and that was, like, developed in, like, between the 10s and implemented into the 30s, 1910s to the 30s. But they had, like, various tests that go back into the late 1800s. But essentially, that seems like it was one of the first deliberate attempts to quantify intelligence. Now, from an anthropology perspective, there is huge criticisms that we make about IQ tests, and a lot of those criticisms come down around culturally insensitive questions or inherent bias within the test, whether it's like gendered bias or like racial bias within the test questions themselves or how they are delivered. There's a very famous example that has been criticized by anthropologists, but it happened in like the 20s on Ellis Island in New York, was where the immigrants came in first. There was numerous anthropologists at that time who were heavily influenced by like phrenology and like studying the shape of people's noses and the shape of their eyes and making judgments on their intelligence and their potential which is key. So a lot of anthropologists would go there in the 20s and conduct these intelligence tests, but you can see in the way they describe their results written a lot of racism and sexism.
That's weird that they'd actually do it like that, you know, from a physical perspective as well. Just with inherent bias built in straight away.
Yeah. So I'm actually I'm curious about the specifics of how these biases work, because this is something I have heard brought up several times around the question of IQ, but I've never actually seen anybody articulate exactly how these biases work, or how they influence the tests. I wonder, could you elaborate just for like 2 minutes?
Yeah,
on
totally.
How it works.
So one of the most obvious ones is if there's a language barrier, right? So if like English is your second language, you're not going to score well on an IQ test. But then there's also differences in literacy levels I'm talking about for IQ tests. Like, say you're giving it to a group of new Canadians, right? Say they just got off the airplane. They're like either immigrants, refugees, migrants, whatever. And you're going to put them in a room and give them all IQ tests like it's the 1920s, right?
Right.
We won't measure their skulls this time, but basically the same deal, right? The issue is if you just gave them a standard IQ test, is that, there would be a language barrier. There would also be a language comprehension issue. So there's varying levels of literacy that like new arrivals are going to have, just because of whatever circumstances that they happen to have come from. And then there's also something people don't often think about, but numerical literacy, like the ability to do math, is also like something you have to learn, obviously, right?
Right.
So if you are illiterate with language, you might also have not got a lot of education in mathematics. So I remember when I took the SAT, so that's the American like standardized pre-college entry exam. It's like the really serious one, right, that people study for all year. I totally don't know how to do long multiplication. Like I was just, I looked at it, I was like, I don't know.
I've never needed to use that before, and I've never
Dude, I was trying to remember that video from grade 4. I was like, oh, what was that Math Wizard video? Like, how did you do that? But I smashed BEDMAS because, like, that always gave me trouble. But, so those are some of the things. But then there's also, there's bias in how the questions are either written or posed themselves. So I remember one anthropology teacher gave this example, like, say you come from a tropical climate, say somewhere around the equator, and you don't have apple trees, right? And all the long word problems are all about like Jane has this many apples and Jimmy has 6 apples, and you're just like, what's an apple? Maybe that's the part of the question that I need to figure out or whatever. And you just spend like 20 minutes on this like arithmetic question because you thought it was all about apples.
Yeah, well, that's actually really interesting though. So like, would you say the only true metric of an IQ test that's accurate is probably like visual intelligence, like working on shapes, trying to like see which things fit? Like that part of the IQ test doesn't require any previous knowledge, doesn't require literacy or anything to do with mathematics, just spatial reasoning.
Well, I guess that, and also there are those abstract reasoning parts of it as well, where it's just which is kind of similar to the spatial reasoning.
Yeah, but then the way those abstract reasoning questions are written, they will create some like incomprehension. And then also IQ tests are usually timed as well. So any sort of language barrier, you're at a huge disadvantage. And then there's also like switch ethnicity and language for gender, and there's a lot of like bias in it in the same vein on a gendered level.
I actually have a question about that. So
Sure.
From what I've heard, and I've seen graphs that seem to suggest this as well, I've heard that generally speaking, women cluster more, or females cluster more around the average. Like they're closer to the average on both sides, whereas males are usually more spread out. So you get more low IQ males and more high IQ males. Is that like true in your experience, or is that just one of those myths that's out there?
The distribution is
the distribution on the bell curve.
I wouldn't be surprised, but then like as an anthropologist, like we don't use IQ tests, right? But like we're just like critical of them, I guess. But
right.
As an anthropologist, I would say that how women or let's say how boys and girls are educated in the school system, like say like native born, they're like grade 10s or something like that, right? Like 14, 15-year-old range. How they're educated is different, and how they're educated is biased in a gendered way as well. So I imagine that the results on that IQ test is reflective of how boys and girls are taught differently in school. So boys are often told that we're natural at like engineering or something, like math, spatial reasoning, and women are supposed to be better at like abstract reasoning or something. But like these are just assumptions. But they're not
do you think
just
they're assumptions? Or?
No, they're not just assumptions because they're reinforced through institutions like the school system.
That's a really interesting perspective that
Yeah,
I actually disagree with.
Oh, really? Cool. Go for
Yeah.
it. I love it.
Well, based on no fact.
Pure anecdote.
Yeah. Well, just the
My
fact
point
that
was too. So let's just say that as
yeah.
well. Like that's just generalization.
It's interesting, you see, just like from studying physics, I can see why you take the perspective of the societal influence on what people choose, and therefore because they choose it or are told that they're good at it, they will do it, and they're more likely to do it, and then they're more likely to get better at it. It's a snowball effect, right? But just by noticing trends in people dropping out of years and like what people choose to do, a lot more guys go for STEM stuff, even from a young age. And spatial reasoning tests, like guys are usually better at, say, like more spatial reasoning kind of IQ scores than, like, say, women might be better at, literacy. And it kind of tends that way. And I don't think society, or at least a lot of the European and, say, North American societies, they don't really have that bias, I feel like, built in now for people people can just choose whatever they want, I feel.
Well, especially the one thing I've heard a lot is in the Scandinavian countries, for instance, that there have been campaigns against gender bias in not just in terms of in education, but just in society generally since the 80s and 90s in, say, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Finland, those countries. And yet, when you look at the workforce distributions, they are actually the most gender polarized on Earth.
As well as that, I'd say it's more you're more likely to be encouraged to go into like a STEM field if you're a woman now than a man, right?
Right. Right.
Men don't get any like push at all. They just assume like if a man wants to do it, they can do it. But you've got quotas, you've got women in STEM campaigns all over the place. And I think that's great. I think smash any kind of social construct to do with people not getting to do what they want to do. But without all the social constructs now and all the campaigns in reverse of it, people still don't tend towards it.
So I would say, I just wrote this down. Basically, it gets down to like laws versus culture, right? Culture is pervasive, it's lasting, it's hard to change. It's hard to change people's cultural perceptions because the assumptions of culture, like what, say for this example, what boys and girls can and cannot do, are embedded so deeply and so throughout society that various affirmative action campaigns and quotas and things like this and initiatives in school, like in Canada we do the same thing. I'm sure you guys do the same thing in the United Kingdom to various levels, whether it's encouraging girls towards...
We're not in the United Kingdom,
Republic
but,
of Ireland.
Republic of Ireland.
Brits out.
Thanks, Matt.
Wait, what is the Republic of Ireland? Is that north or south?
South. So
Okay.
we'll take the north as well. But.
The north is going to vote to rejoin us in 10 years. But basically, so we had a revolution in 1960, and that really wasn't a successful revolution. But they executed all the leaders of the revolution, and that got the Irish people really riled up. And there was a lot of violence, and there was independence war, and eventually the southern 26 counties became independent from Britain, and the northern 6 stayed part of Britain.
So the United Kingdom includes Scotland, Wales, England, and Northern Ireland. And
Northern Ireland,
Southern Ireland, or the Republic of Ireland, is its own thing.
Yeah, you probably no one calls it Southern Ireland.
No, Republic, or just Ireland.
I was like, I don't know, it's
the
the southern part.
Sorry to absolutely steamroll your point there.
Anyway,
that's okay, because I knew that history as well. I just meant more the United Kingdom, like the general area.
Well, the British Isles is the correct term.
The British Isles. Okay,
yeah.
cool. And my co-host is like French speaking, right? Canadian. But man, if I call him a francophone versus French Canadian, he makes sure I know the difference, and I always mess it up, not intentionally either. But anyway, so like the idea is there. Like this is what I would suggest is that cultural assumptions are so pervasive and they're so lasting, right? They're very, very difficult to change. that you do need to pass the laws in order to like kick culture in the ass and get it moving in a different direction. Like, yeah. So,
What kind of laws are you talking about, Mark?
oh, I mean like affirmative action laws, like policies that encourage girls towards the trades or science and technology, engineering. And I hear you that the numbers don't reflect the policy. So a law is really easy to change and to adjust. Like, hey, let's do this. Let's encourage more girls towards the trades. Let's pass these 6 laws in Canada for whatever example. But then you still see it reflected in the numbers that girls aren't in the trades or in science and technology, and that's an indication that it's because of various cultural factors.
Right.
I mean, heck,
Yeah.
The other thing too with women, let's not forget, like having a kid or having a family will take you out of any job
Right.
market.
That's a big factor, and especially some of the more, I guess, usually when you're speaking in terms of STEM fields, if you're talking about people who are working within those fields, it's usually they're the outliers almost, right? They're the people who have gotten to the very top, and that takes quite a amount of time to get to the top. And so,
Yeah.
to get a PhD, I'm sure, as you well know, to get a PhD takes a long time. So
Right.
a woman is quite likely to have had kids before the year where
Because you're going
they have a
right through your
PhD.
20s and into your
Right,
30s,
exactly,
and
yeah.
that's like
yeah,
your...
so there's a physical parameter as well. But
Yeah.
I would
I'm
Or
not
they
even sure
put
that's a cultural thing,
off
you know?
having kids until after their PhD. Then they want to work for like maybe 4 or 5 years, and then they're having kids when they're 35.
Right,
And
yeah.
that's a big decision too, because I got a 1-year-old now. Just speaking for my wife, like as you get later into your 30s, it's riskier to have kids, right? So
Yeah, of course, yeah.
so these are the trade-offs that only women have to make. Like for men, if as long as you're able-bodied, you can just have a kid and then go back to work.
Yeah,
Like it might
sure.
bum you out a bit, but like you can literally just
And-
go back to work the next day.
I'm not even sure that's not. So yeah, certainly cultural biases definitely do come into it. I wonder
But
about
that's
the
just
extent.
that's just a physiological difference.
Yeah, that's
a
literally just
factor
biology,
as well.
yeah.
Yeah, which I think is interesting because that's just another factor. So like with anthropology, typically we're like there's many factors that are all mutually informing, and that's actually kind of why I like your guys' show because you dig into all the different dimensions of of an issue.
Yeah, you see, I'd use that point to kind of disprove your one about society being the only factor. That's the only reason I was.
Oh no, I never do.
I-
Some social
you know-
scientists do come down that, but I would call that social determinism, and it's a deterministic like philosophy. I
Yeah.
don't buy that for a second. No, and because when I say social factors, that's like person to person interaction. That's what I mean
Okay,
by social.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting. Like, I'd say though the fact that you're saying that they do need these laws and they have these laws, especially as Pierce said in Scandinavian countries, and the distribution still tended towards something. I'd say that that's just interest based, right? It's just like a lot of women would tend to go to like be a nurse, right? Like staggering amount, 90% compared to like maybe 10% of guys. That kind of makes sense, the whole maternal instinct and stuff like that.
I think
And no one's telling
yeah.
anybody that they can't be or
Yeah.
shouldn't.
Of course. Yeah.
I think that is the important point, is that it says nothing of the individual, right?
Yeah.
It has like the what would you say, the differences between the groups say nothing about the individual person, right?
Yes.
I mean, Marie Curie is the ultimate example, the only winner of 2 or Nobel Prizes in 2 different science disciplines, right? There's no determinism as far as an individual. It's just it's a question of groups, and that's it, really.
But it is interesting to know where the boundary is, right? Because, of course, we'd all love to say that everybody has the unbiased pressure to like do whatever they want, right? But where is that boundary? Is it where you state mandate laws? Is it where, like, when does your society get to that point? It's like where we'd all like to get to. How do you know? And then
Like,
if
what's
you
the
push it-
measure?
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
What's the metric-
when
what's
have
the
we
metric
gotten
that you
there?
use?
Yeah.
Exactly. Or are you going to start making laws and keep pushing until you make people unhappy in jobs that they might not necessarily want to do? They just thought it was they had to because of who they are, because they had to stand up. I don't know.
And also, like, just to throw on another complicating factor, but like when you say there's individual, then groups, and then there's like small groups where, like, say a workplace, I would say, like, say a construction site. I don't know, like maybe this is being way oversimple, but there are certain environments that I think, like being the only woman on a construction site, that might be pretty intimidating, and you're probably going to be dealing with harassment like every other day. Maybe you got to like prove yourself as well. There, people are making like lewd jokes at you, messing with your lunch, all these sorts of like, hey, don't worry, we do it to all the guys, like it's no big deal, but they do it harder to you, you know.
Yeah, well, that's undeniable, you know. Yeah.
And then like that's what you're like, hey, join the trades. It's awesome.
Yeah,
It's
right, I
like,
get it,
you
yeah.
can wear a pink hard hat. It's like
Yeah.
then you really stand out on the construction site. So
Even
like,
saying wear a pink
yeah.
hair, that man.
Oh,
Yeah.
don't you dare.
yeah. So it's
There you-
like it is one of those factors. It's like how appealing would that be, right? But like for me, I'll just say for myself, like I've always been a very like maternal guy, and I'd even be like teased for it growing up.
Really?
But like when it comes to like, I would be like a full-time caregiver. Like I would be the kind of guy that would run a daycare, but single guy running a daycare, like this would be like years ago, but like a single guy running a daycare, like it's a little weird, right? Like I'm
even
sure
now,
he's
I'm
cool.
sure
like maybe I'm
there
like
are
Fred
certain people
Penner.
who would feel
Yeah,
would feel odd
but
about it.
a little weird, right? And like
Yeah.
maybe like you know, some parents send their kids with a teddy bear with a camera in it or something. Like, you know, right?
Yeah,
So-
well, I mean, yeah, and that
it does cut both
that's
ways,
true,
but
yeah.
it cuts harder against women. So I think you got to do, personally, I feel like you got to put the laws out there and then just let culture do its thing. And then like after 15 years, we look back, we like, women want to be electricians, but for some reason they don't want to be a plumber. I don't know why, but just look at the numbers. And we did everything to encourage both trades, and it just seems like women tended to gravitate this direction. And then you just move forward.
It's interesting, but I would just be so against the government getting involved in that.
Oh, I'm a
It
socialist,
could-
though.
Yeah,
I'm full on. Like, get
I mean,
right in there,
we're
boys.
European, like we have those biases too.
Yeah,
But yeah.
the government being involved, like mandating people, telling them what they should do, that sounds like tyranny, you know.
But
Like,
then-
do
but
they
with
have
this is
laws to tell
education.
a certain amount of men that they have to be in a certain time? Like, does everything have to be 50-50? Like, literally, where do you draw the line? You know.
Well, they're trying to correct a historical like inequality, right?
Right, yeah, and I guess like so, Seamus would probably be more left leaning than I am, even though he didn't sound it there, but certainly economically, Seamus would be more left leaning.
We're all a mixture of political, like
Right, exactly, yeah, and
views,
those axes are starting to lose their meaning in the modern political
But
context.
I'm actually a socialist. I'll say that capital S.
Yeah.
Socialist.
Fair enough, yeah. But I guess so. In terms of correcting, like it is right to if there is some cultural bias against women doing entering X job or whatever, it's right to correct that. But I'm not sure that you should necessarily, and it could work the opposite way as well. It's like you're correcting a cultural bias so that more men get into nursing, say, right? But I'm not sure you should use quotas. Say just we'll take nursing as an example. If you decided that not even 50-50, but say 40% of your nurses had to be men and 60% had to be women.
Yeah, that's too hard.
Right, yeah. There's a
Yeah.
potential there where you have more women who are more qualified. Like a significant number of women who are more qualified. They did better in their nursing degrees. They have more experience in the workplace or whatever from interning. But you just have this hard cap of 40%.
Yeah.
And so it's not a meritocracy at that point. It's unfair against.
Even say like, well, like obviously in Canada and Ireland, like we've got public health systems, but like say like a private company that's still mandated by these laws, they have to choose someone, not necessarily like, but they could have to choose someone who's less qualified for a job or less experienced or whatever to fill a quota, a man or a woman, and then that could negatively affect their business just by saturating it with people who aren't qualified.
Yeah, and it's meritocracy. So like, that's an interesting concept. So we like to think our society is meritocracy one, but we of course know that it's not, right?
Yeah, of course.
So you need to kind of massage the system, but I agree, hard quotas, that's the, I feel like politicians just make those up so that they have numbers to put forward when election time comes.
Right. Yeah.
Right. That's what quotas are there for.
And
yeah.
you can see how they go wrong as well.
Easier too, probably.
Yeah, because I know in certain universities in the United States they've brought in quotas, and
Right.
it was to encourage, say, just minorities and stuff to help them get in.
Yeah,
but
well-intentioned.
yeah, exactly. But what it's actually done is, I think roughly the amount of white people entering the college is still roughly the same. there's more people of color going in, but then Asians are actually being discriminated against. They, especially, I can't remember which universities it was, but it was literally because on average Asians just say, I think it was specifically Southeast Asians.
I think there was
do better
a New
in
York
school.
Times article about Harvard. And
yeah, Harvard. Yeah,
I've listened to this podcast. I don't know what the. Did you hear this on a podcast?
I read it in. I think I read it.
I'm not sure
okay.
if we've spoken about it before,
I might have heard it on a podcast, but they're talking about that article or something like this. Yeah,
right.
sort of
Yeah,
study.
and so basically, it turned out when they looked at the numbers that the number of Asians entering Harvard had fallen, and it was because they were using these quotas, and it was actually discriminating against a minority, that being Southeast Asians.
Yeah, and then they will also maybe, if you're just looking for people of color, whatever the hell that category means.
Right, yeah, right, yeah.
Especially in America.
Yeah,
or even in Canada. Like, in Canada, we have reasonable tuition rates for our university. It's not like America, but it's not as cheap as Europe, I would say.
Well, we should say European countries differ as well. Like, in Ireland, you still have to pay 3,000, for the year.
Oh,
That's
wow,
considerably cheap than, like, compared to, like...
The UK is 9,000, but then Germany's free, so...
Mm-hmm. And, well, so what would happen here in the North American context? There's a lot more private universities in America, and there's just a lot more universities. But basically, you become competitive for international students, whether they're coming from China or if they're coming from India. Like, you can even... No, probably not Russian, but like you start picking like Koreans, like Southeast Asians, like anyone who's got money, because you can charge an international student in Canada at least basically twice the tuition rate, like double tuition.
Right, yeah.
So
not
not
taxes,
only is it finance, no, I mean like literally your tuition is twice as much.
Oh, right.
Like it's like this is the international student tuition rate, and it's like double, and so they become hyper competitive. So there you're trying to put a quota on the universities being greedy capitalists, right? Where they're just trying to get all those students. Yeah, that one, the last one, that wasn't even leaking through, man. That was right on the freaking nose.
Someone turned the tap there.
I just punched capitalism in the face.
I mean, James is saying this here, but I've been with him on a night out where he's tried to encourage a workers' revolution amongst some builders on the side of a road.
Oh, God, keep me away from whiskey. I'm of Scottish heritage, right? So I got that fire in me as well.
Yes.
We call it holy water. I don't know what you refer to whiskey
holy
as.
Water.
Holy water.
I mean, the word for whiskey in Irish is... Ishkabaha, right? Which means water of life.
There it is, yeah.
There you go, yeah.
Right, to get back onto it, I'd love to just revisit the whole concept of IQ. I think it's really important to, note, we think of IQ, and you said it was made in, the 1910s, okay? Or was it implemented in the 1910s?
Basically,
the fact that we needed a metric to tell us who is more intelligent, even though it's very rarely used as an employment thing, shows how much onus and how much importance we put on it in society.
Yeah, culturally, intelligence is very valued, and more so as the years go on, as we're entering a more technological society, and just computing is becoming so big. The STEM subjects are only growing. There is such a cultural pride, I guess, and value placed on intelligence, and it is interesting that we've actually, systemified it almost.
Yeah, regardless of how effective it is.
Yeah,
I'm
we
sure
felt the need to do that.
We felt the need.
And we see it across other sectors too. Like, look at politics, right? With that that quiz. Oh God, I can't believe I forgot the name of that crooked polling firm that the Republicans used.
Oh, they were in concert with Facebook, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they
Cambridge Analytica.
That's it, and they and that's a perfect example of trying polling data and quantifying it, crunching the numbers. Like, my wife works in politics, and she works for a member of parliament here in Canada. So they do this sort of stuff all the time, but they don't use Cambridge Analytica. They just look at where did our supporters come from on our poll map and stuff like that. So we do this sort of trying to group certain people in certain categories. I think this is a really meta sort of view, but I feel as humans, we are deep down, way down in the instinct level, afraid of other humans. And I think it goes back to the time, this is a little out there, but it goes back to the time where humans and Neanderthals coexisted.
Ah, of course, yeah.
I think we're afraid of the strange outsider, yeah. So
and just other tribes, I guess. Because,
Exactly.
I mean, you saw it when Europeans colonized the Americas. It wasn't necessarily the guns that killed other natives. It was just the disease that the Europeans brought, they introduced to their immune systems and killed so many. And I'm sure it was the same with individual tribal groups at the very beginning.
Yeah, and intelligence has been used as like a systematic racism tool throughout history as well, right?
Right, yeah.
It's like there'd be like say the Europeans, the slave owners would be like, well, black people aren't as intelligent. They're like practically like apes or whatever. So intelligence has been used as a metric to differentiate and like put yourself above other people throughout history. And I suppose
and you would argue because the IQ test was developed in America, so by people who maybe not too long ago, maybe their parents were slave owners, right? So they were using this tool or other tools like it, the precursors of the IQ test, as a way of justifying their enslavement of, for example, black people, or not giving opportunities to new Americans from, like, say, Italy. Because before the Italian immigration happened, it was the Irish who were the scapegoat population.
Yeah,
and then when the Italians showed up, they started picking on the Italians. And then Jewish people showed up and they started picking on Jews. And then all three of them started doing organized crime in the 20s and 30s because they're like, screw it, I got to defend ourselves, right?
Puerto Ricans, Cubans, Irish, Italians. Already.
Well, the Jews have had it rough of late.
But then they were going to, then at that time, they would be like, see, they're not as intelligent. Or, see, Irish people, Italian people, and Jewish people are therefore prone to violence and criminality. You could see it in the shape of their nose. Because that's what the shit they were doing in the 20s is called phrenology. It's like studying the bumps on your head, and eugenics was the wider ideology, I suppose it was. But it was like a science back then. And these racist philosophical beliefs, I guess you could call it, these are the things that were used to justify the maltreatment of other people.
Yeah. Certainly, yeah. I mean, it is interesting a point you brought up there as well. Just to not segue, I suppose, but just move on a little bit. The way certain scientific practices fall out of favor over time and are usurped. So phrenology is an obvious example where, and I'd imagine if you went back and looked at exactly how rigorous they were with phrenology, it was really just probably one guy said, "Oh yeah, look, we're going to measure skulls, right? There's difference in skull sizes." So that
at the beginning, but then it
bias.
became like at the beginning, yes, but like that was some dumbass's idea or whatever, right? But then, like, let's be honest, it's not the smartest idea in the world. And then it developed into like full blown science by like the 20s and 30s. There was like full on textbooks on this shit, but it was all rubbish,
Yeah, the thing is, we can retroactively look at it as rubbish so easy, right? Yeah. But so you're saying it's like an idiot's idea, and sure, like we can look at it now, and like I mean, really, it was. But at this stage, like technology itself was just being explored, like, you know what I mean? Didn't have the telephone, so we did have a telephone, but like just about, and we were literally on the cusp of things. So scientific methods, although primitive and clearly wrong, I suppose led to other things.
Yeah, I guess it's like
totally.
going back and saying, oh, Isaac Newton, he was stupid. He didn't understand what gravity was. He didn't understand that it was a curve
Isaac
in space time.
Isaac Newton was like a genius. That guy was so smart.
Man.
Him and Leonardo da Vinci, those guys were freaking geniuses.
Himself, Leonardo, and probably von Neumann are probably the most
I'm actually more impressed by the people who come up with the ideas that eventually become physics. Or calculus in Newton's case.
Then actually do it,
invented calculus.
I mean, apparently he invented it to win a bet as well. He did.
That's right, just to spite somebody, right?
Well, I mean, like, Leibniz was doing it at the same time.
That's right.
He just crushed him. He's like, I know we two completely different ways on how we discover this, but no, it's mine. So,
and it was the same with evolution as well. There was another scientist who was studying at the same time as Darwin. There was a bit of a race between them.
Lenaric or something?
I mean, he doesn't matter anymore.
Exactly. He's the guy that believed that giraffes' like heads grew bigger, like their necks grew longer because they wanted to reach a higher point on the tree. Right? That's the classic
example. They willed
it
into being.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's also. I mean, I would say to our listeners, if you want to see if you ever want to read about a true genius, I know people like Albert Einstein are generally like what you would think of, but there was a guy same time as Albert Einstein, John von Neumann. If you literally just go onto his Wikipedia page and look at how many fields he's affected. It was basically every field in physics. Like he's the reason we were able 20 years later to figure out what DNA was, because he came up with the idea of self-replication. All of these mad different things outside of physics and within physics and maths that he affected. John von Neumann, probably the smartest person of the 20th century.
Was he a mathematician primarily?
He was a mathematician / physicist. He also was instrumental in the creation of... See, he was a physicist because he became instrumental in the creation of the first atom bomb and just nuclear science generally.
Right.
There was all sorts of stuff. He even predicted that France would fall really quickly in World War II when nobody did. He just figured it out. Yeah.
Hopefully he didn't sell that secret.
No. Apparently somebody came up and asked. They were just talking about World War II, and he literally basically just said, "Oh, France. Oh no, they won't last much more than a month." And that was it. He was just completely right.
Man, like, okay, so how many other people at cocktail parties were saying that same thing at the same time, or in the future, dropping one of those at a cocktail party would become known as dropping a Neumann.
Dropping a Neumann.
Oh, you just Neumanned up in this cocktail party.
Yeah, but you have to be right?
Yeah,
so
that guy just
that'd
got
be a
Neumann.
cocktail party at the end of the war, and he'd be like, yes, I lie.
Anyway, yeah, that was a tangent. John von Neumann. I mean, as I suppose, well, he's an interesting case when we were talking about intelligence, because there was a guy, he was working with all of these other wonderfully high-level physicists, Richard Feynman, Albert Einstein,
right.
Oppenheimer. They were all in the same place, and all of them, anybody who's ever asked about von Neumann attested to the fact that he was on the same way they would be on a completely different plane of existence to us in terms of thinking power. He was too, and I guess that's where there are cultural biases in terms of who's intelligent and who isn't, but there is clearly a strong genetic factor as well.
Like, so you guys seem like you've been to university a long time. I was at university for 16 years, right? I went all the way to PhD level, and I took my time as an undergrad. I would say about 5 people I met along the way I would consider like pure geniuses. Where it's like, holy crap, that person, like, it seems like almost a disability in some ways.
That brings on a very interesting point about different types of intelligence, right? Because we know some hyper intelligent people, very, very intelligent people, but very socially unintelligent.
Socially inept almost.
Yeah. And just because of like that kind of intelligence, like pure maths geniuses or like literary geniuses, historical geniuses, just able to absorb this kind of information, right? They still might be completely socially inept, and that is a huge kind of intelligence as well, right? That's how people climb hierarchies,
become CEOs,
even when they don't have too much like actual intelligence for leading.
Well, there are so many politicians with plenty of social intelligence, but just not much actual intelligence. Yeah, or like mathematical or critical thinking intelligence. Yeah, but it is interesting that there are different.
We have a politician here in Canada. She works for the NDP. Her first name is Helene, a French Canadian. She's a foreign affairs genius. She used to work for the Foreign Service in Canada, so she was worked within the diplomatic service, right? But she can just when you hear her deliver a speech, it's like bam, 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 stat, like connection, and you can just see this far away look in her eyes. It's like she's not even looking at her paper. She's just and amongst the entire party and amongst the other parties in Canada, they're like, she's the best, and she just won the MP of the Year award. Wow. She's incredible. She shouldn't even be an MP. She's too gifted. What is she doing here? Get back to the Foreign Service. You're amazing. So, but that is interesting. And then there is the various forms of intelligence, right? And it's interesting when we think about academics, right? People who become academics and become employed by universities. I don't know, if it depends on the discipline, the different subject, but it seems like there's a certain type of what an academic should be in terms of the different types of intelligences that they should possess. So I was wondering if you guys could actually speak about your experience, going to university and encountering academics a bit when it comes to intelligence.
Well, I mean, so we find ourselves in the STEM fields. So, I mean, the kind of academics that we would generally meet, it's all critical thinking, mathematical skills, basically.
Yeah, but myself and Pierce at one time, actually in successive order, were a chairperson of the debate society in our college too. So
nerd alert.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry, guys.
We studied applied physics and
heads of the debate society.
Okay, so as you said that to me in text form, I was like, oh god, applied physics. I got so many questions. I had to hold back. I'm like, who's the nerd?
Don't feel them to me. like, yeah, intelligence is such a broad one. You could almost argue then spiritual intelligence, does that come into play? You know, there's so many different kinds, but like spiritual intelligence is very, very interesting because it's so subjective, right?
It's like musical intelligence almost. Yeah.
Musical intelligence too. It's like, okay, you can have perfect pitch, but who tells you that this is good music? Like,
so why do we say spiritual intelligence is so subjective, as if that's a pejorative? Like, why is subjective a pejorative? And I'm going to answer my own question, but it's the dominance and the prevalence of science in our society, where we, like, science is the truth teller, and then psychology would be the most truthful of, like, the arts disciplines, right? And maybe economics as well. But it's like, it's objectivity, it's rationality. That is at the root of our sort of Western cultural assumption in our paradigm, is that science has the truth.
Right, and I think obviously you can have social critiques of that, or just, you know, that might have certain negative effects on society. But I think there are maybe I wouldn't even say
it's not a bad thing. I'm just going to say that right now. Like,
exactly,
please me, I like penicillin. Like, I'm not one of those idiots.
Yeah, right.
Like,
but
I'm just being like an ass, you know. I'm just critical.
Right? No, but it's important to. And
Steve Jobs meditate the pancreatic cancer.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even apply a moral thing to it, but I think those things are so valued because over the last 100 years, technological. Most technological advancements until the last, say, 20 or 30 years have come from the West, and I suppose the Soviet Union as well, and we can see the obvious benefits year on year of these. Now, there are certainly negatives to certain types of technological progression as well, but
it's tangible.
The benefits are so tangible, and you can see that you can see in terms of the years where we've lived, the amount that communications intelligence has, or technology has shot up, is really incredible. And even kids today are growing up with I know the world is completely different to when myself and Seamus were growing up.
Yeah, and not only the actual tangible technological benefits that we get, you know, the light bulb, whatever, you know, to society, the societies that are built on our kind of philosophy compared to one that's completely spiritually based, say, like, you know, Tibet. Right. I love the Dalai Lama and I love the teachings and stuff, but, like, you know, just ignore the Chinese until they don't annex your country, like, you know.
Didn't work.
Yeah,
Did
absolutely
not work.
Didn't, right? You know, peaceful, of course, and whatever, no one died, but to have a country that works properly, that's tangible, and that's why it's less. Yeah, exactly, because you can progress year on year. And
But
see,
again,
you can
like,
physically see the changes.
But the okay, so tangible and progress and year after year growth, those are combo they come from corporate / science world, like the business world and science, right? Because corporations, they want profits every year, right? So they need to see continuous growth. And then science, it builds upon itself, like, through failed experimentation, essentially, which is great. I mean, like, that's what developed into penicillin and stuff. So, but it's a constant building upon, and those are prized, like, emotionally positive things.
Right.
Whereas a country like Bhutan, maybe, which is a theocratic monarchy, like, driven, there's many reasons why Bhutan is not economically developed, and it goes beyond their spiritualism. But I look at Bhutan, I'm like, man, that looks like a pretty sweet place to live.
Yeah,
like, it looks pretty chill, like, relaxed. Like, you could still get internet access if you want, because that's the times we live in, and that's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Right.
But,
yeah.
But I mean,
I guess
your progress is a construct, right? And you can't go around to your citizens and be like, well, you know, what plane of spiritual enlightenment are you on right now? And then
Level 1, 2, 3.
or maybe some of us, look, dude, I would love to know that about Donald Trump right now. I want to know what plane that guy is on, but I don't think it's Air Force One.
Wait, I think he lives in the astral plane. Donald Trump's spirit exited his body a long time ago, and his soul is living somewhere else entirely.
It's all the KFC.
Yeah. But
he's 70. He's doing it, like, fair play to him, man.
Yeah, and I guess, but
food.
to use that example of Bhutan, it's interesting because obviously it's quite a spiritual country, as you were saying, but you know,
poor,
it's also it's poor. It's very poor, but also it does also import, say, medicine and internet access, as you said, that has
Right.
come from some technological society. So there's certainly a
course.
balance to be struck for sure. And maybe it will always be the case that there are just some nations, as long as there always are, if provided there always are nations, it might just be the case that there are some nations that are more lean spiritually and more that are leaned technologically, and both kind of interact over time and import different ideas
And
from each other.
that's an interesting question as well, in the fact that, like, does technology equate happiness in the long run, right?
Right.
So, like, our progress, our philosophies in like our Western societies, will that equate happiness, or like is it like a tipping scales?
Or
where-
meaning,
And what is
purpose.
happiness?
Exact. What is it like? But or is like meditating and having a very poor lifestyle the happiness? Like, is the technological benefits good for humans? Are they? I don't know.
And
Apart from living longer.
And it's also, so there's the benefits, which I think that's undeniable. We want to be careful about like embracing all technology, blah blah. We want to be critical, but like by and large, like it's a pretty sweet time to be alive. Like let's just say that very clearly.
Right, probably the best ever.
But it is the best time ever, I think.
Not worried about wolves or cholera. It's okay.
Exactly, no smallpox. So, but I wrote down the movement, but the Luddites from
Right,
yeah.
the
Smashing
Industrial
up
Revolution,
loons.
yeah, exactly. So there's always been resistors, and I feel like as we see the advancement of artificial intelligence, and that is a huge topic, which I think is fascinating, but scary. Like, I am so scared of AI, and I have such a hard time articulating why that is. But it
Well,
terrifies me.
I think so. It goes back to what you were talking
Probably the
about.
fear of other. I don't know.
With-
You're
yeah,
just
with
a
the
whip,
other.
you're just a whip man, like,
yeah.
just man up and just accept
Hey,
AI.
no,
Yeah,
I'm going to
it's
Bhutan,
like, you
bro.
know what I mean?
I'm going to Bhutan. I'm going to find me a nice valley that they never find me.
But
I keep
yeah,
a baseball bat because it doesn't need batteries.
Just eat
a
corn.
wooden bat.
Meditate.
That'll
Yeah,
do.
I'll take a cricket paddle as well.
That'll get rid of the hunter killer
bats.
drones. But yeah. So yeah, it is probably a fear of the other, and it's not just the other. It's like this entirely alien thing. It could be a completely different, especially, if it really is the case that intelligence is just, or you say cognitive ability is just a matter of information processing. And so if you get an AI, a general AI, up to the point where it can process information better than humans, then it will be more intelligent than us. It's not just that. It is the worry that we could build something other than us that is just as intelligent as us. But it's also the worry that if the progress is exponential, we could effectively build a god by accident.
Oops.
Yeah, right,
Like,
right, yeah,
what?
yeah, right. It could be these AIs, if you put enough
Thanks,
power
man.
into them and they have enough infrastructure.
I'll be
not getting
sleeping
to sleep
soundly
tonight.
tonight.
Right?
Is that
Yeah,
what
yeah.
the God particle is? Huh?
Oh man, hopefully.
Just kidding. I'm kidding. But no, that is the thing. Or Terminator 2 style. They just like take us over or see
Just nuke
that.
us, yep.
Yeah, or they see that we are unnecessary. Like we're actually kind of a parasite on this earth.
Well, if
And
there's more
like
Arnold Schwarzeneggers
honestly,
running
if you're
around, I'm
looking,
happy.
yeah, if you're looking from their perspective, we actually are. Or like if you look from a
Right.
deer's perspective, we suck. Like we're just shooting them all day. We're garbage all over their habitat. Yeah, no, like humans do suck, and we are dirty, and we leave trash behind, and we're kind of assholes. Like we are mean to each other, but there are people, believe it or not, in the social sciences who are much more cynical than I am. Like I'm actually very optimistic. I'm literally afraid of AI. Like that
I
terrifies
like
me.
to
But
think that AI will think that we're like an ancient civilization. You know what I mean? They'll be like, "Oh, well
Yeah.
done, we'll take it from here." You know?
well, we'll be the
Right.
primitive other, right? And
Exactly,
that's
but-
what the colonists thought when they arrived on the shores here.
Right, and I don't to be honest, I don't even find the Terminator scenario like as scary as some of the other scenarios, because the Terminator one, that's pure malevolence, and that's something we can understand as humans. But it might just be that
True
these
that.
general artificial intelligence are so far beyond us that they just don't have any interest in us. Like they literally might just abandon us and go off to some other part of the universe. You know?
Oh my god, do you know how rejected we'd all feel? Like
Yeah,
we'd all just
yeah.
like wake up one day and we just look around, our cell phones have walked away, and we're just like, well, fuck.
No,
I guess
They
they were
didn't even
serious,
think
boys.
we were worth murdering. They didn't even think that was.
they prefer the barren surface of Mars to us. How dare they?
Does anyone have a bottle opener? Oh, shit. Oh my god, yeah, no, that's terrifying.
to a titanium asteroid to make it. So.
But then, like, it's funny, like, technology not always equating to happiness, but some people get a ton of enjoyment out of technology, buying the latest gadgets, learning it, unboxing it. And I, as an anthropologist, one of the tenets of anthropology is relativism. Like,
Right.
man, if it doesn't hurt somebody else and it feels good to you, go for it. And I'm not going to judge that. So if I see somebody joyfully opening the iPhone, whatever the hell number it is, and he does a little video on YouTube, I'm not so angry that would like ruin my day. But there's an interesting, like, I would argue, a pervasive cynicism that is permeating our societies. Maybe the Western societies, I don't know what's going on in Bhutan in this regard, but they seem pretty happy. But I think there is a cynicism.
Bhutan, man.
This guy knows.
I've been eyeballing that place for a while, man. There's a reason I keep bringing it up. There's the most dialects of languages, and in such a concentrated place in Bhutan, it's all valleys. But anyway, I think there's a cynicism and an apathy that is pervading our society, and I was wondering if you guys are picking up on this at all.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You know, you have the philosophy of relativism, but I'd say that's quite relative. You know, in the fact that
yeah, totally, that's the point,
okay.
man. Congrats,
No. Oh, yeah, cheers, yeah. Well,
You postmodern,
so you're saying like, okay, their happiness is relative. So if they're relatively happy, then that's fine.
Yeah,
but I'd say, well, is that happiness, is that relatively the most amount of the happiness they could have? So if they are having happiness from opening the new iPhone or whatever, maybe that isn't the right kind of happiness. It's just like you might enjoy eating a hamburger, but is that the right kind of food? Like you can enjoy eating like healthy food too.
Well, I think, but I do think there certainly are people who can find, say, meaning in the material. Like, I really do believe I missed my calling as a turn of the century industrialist. Like, that's where I belonged, just running
too.
some huge
Believe it or not, me
steel
too.
mill.
Yeah.
Right?
I'd run the
that's it,
railway,
like,
you can run the steel.
fantastic.
Actually, no, I get lumber. I'm from British Columbia.
Oh,
I know
yeah,
all
yeah.
about
No,
lumber.
there's something about those huge steel factories that just appeals to me. Just the aesthetic of it. But, God, I had a point to
It was
make.
about like the enjoyment. About would they enjoy it more? Like even like I'm saying that they might not enjoy it as much. As
Oh, right, yeah. But again, even that's relative, right? You can't say that for
Yes,
any...
I can.
You
I
can't
just said
objectively state that, right? You know, for
I
all,
can
for
tell
all,
everybody what
for the
makes
sum
them
of all
happy.
individuals. Yeah, but in terms, certainly there does seem to be a pervading sense of cynicism and I don't know, apathy, as you were saying. I think that is actually it's more delayed than he thought, but I think this is what Friedrich Nietzsche was referring to when when you think about Nietzsche, he has that famous quote, "God is dead," and everybody thinks that's like a celebratory thing that he was saying, but it really wasn't. The whole reason Nietzsche wrote his books was he was terrified of the fact that he knew it was happening, but he was terrified of the fact that religion was being unseated as our central moral principle in the West, and he was trying to create some philosophy to replace that. And I think that's what's happening at the moment. Religion, I mean, we've seen it in real time here in Ireland. The Catholic Church has taken a serious beating over the last 20 years just because of all the paedophilia scandals, and obviously Catholicism was the major religion in Ireland. So there's a lot of people have totally rejected the Catholic Church, and that's for obvious reasons, fair enough, yeah, and I would be in line with them. I'd probably define myself as agnostic, but
it's hard when
there is
your
a central
schools
meaning,
are all Catholic,
right?
and
Right,
your
yeah,
institutions. You see a cross in like your parliament, I imagine, like all these sorts of symbols of Catholicism, and
Yeah, we're not secular by any means.
and
Yeah,
this is like a
and
Protestant sort of nation over in Canada, right? Because
Right.
the French Canadians are the Catholics in this country, so there is that division. So yeah, it is kind of interesting.
Yeah, and but what I would say is so there's certainly practical dimensions to it that need to be resolved, but also I think when you take what was absolutely central to the belief system of a country, and like the majority of the citizens, say 95 or 96%, were like really believed in that system, and then within the space of 20 years, you almost entirely, or like to a very large degree, remove that. It leaves the population stranded amidst some, black ocean. Like I think a lot of people really don't know where to derive their purpose from at the moment.
But
It's not
that's
to say
because the culture takes so long to change. Sorry to interrupt,
Right,
but that's my earlier point was like, yeah, you can make drastic changes to society. And that to me, 20 years, I'm like, wow, that's actually really fast. Like I was expecting this to take longer, and it will take longer because it's all through culture.
Right, yeah, and I think stuff like that's a case example with Ireland, but stuff like that is the reason so many people are apathetic and cynical at the moment, because they don't have any
I can see
central
that.
belief system. And I'm not saying it necessarily has to be a religion, but some philosophy guiding their life, some kind of core, valuation of humans, anything along those lines.
Yeah, Matt's good with socialism, isn't he, Matt?
Yeah, I do, and it's but like what my rock is, the basis behind my socialism, because that's just like what I am as a political kind of guy, right? Like if I ran for office, that's not how I'd bill myself because that's a dirty word now.
Right.
But what I really am is I like to think as a humanist. Like when it comes to relativity, like I pride myself on having a very diverse, like racially and ethnically diverse friend group. I'm just really
Do you have
good
quotas for that?
people. I do. I'm slipping on my Southeast Asian actually. I got to pick up some Vietnamese people.
We'll get some over to you, don't worry.
But no, like I feel like that's where my socialism comes from. Like I'm very want others to succeed, and I find that very encouraging and stuff. And the thing that pisses me off most about society is when people aren't taking care of each other. And like the other thing along with Nietzsche that I just kept rattling in my head was the social contract. And that is something that is starting to evolve. And you can see that even like as you're driving out on the roads. Like people are just tailgating you. Like I got a baby on board sticker. Dude, people started tailgating me like crazy. But maybe it's because I also drive a Prius. Like they're I hate this guy.
Get a Tesla, man. That you'll be able to accelerate a lot faster than no tailgating.
Yeah, and it's like even like everyone's gonna hold a door for an elderly woman or something, but like, yeah, you see a dude behind you, you're gonna like just pause and just like make sure he catches the door, stuff like that, like little things, so little social graces. Right. That's where you start seeing like I think like a society-wide apathy or society-wide cynicism is in those little individual moments of not being graceful to each other.
Yeah, altruism.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And you see, like, it seems like this is something that, like, Phil, if he was on, he would go in this direction. But the emergence of the nuclear family as being the most important social unit, like the primary social organizing body, is the family, the 2 parents and 2.5 children and a dog or whatever, right?
Right.
But now we see more commonly now it's like the promotion of the individual. Right, so we don't even really have the nuclear family as much. We all have to be an individual personality out there, and that, like, if you're thinking along Nietzsche's lines again, those people are really like islands without any anchorage, right? Because you're really looking for something, and that's when you start seeing people get like way too into religion or way too into politics or aliens. Like it could be anything, but they're searching, right?
It's those people, right? So. That are like the very dangerous ones. I'm not talking about they can become skill shooters, even though they could. Like they're dangerous to themselves and the way they think, because one of the good things about religion is it offered a very collective mindset that you are part of this greater community and like God loves you, right? God's there for you. But when you are told in a world where you're an individual that you're also special, and you have to live up to that, but then everybody around you is trying to find out and do the same thing as you, which is be special. It's not true, right? Even though everybody is completely different, but to have that philosophy is really damaging to yourself. Because
unless you're somebody with the kind of backbone of Ayn Rand, where you can just take that kind of philosophy and run with it, and it really does fulfill you. And I'm sure there are people like that. CEOs would be a good example.
I'm not saying it's completely bad.
But not for the majority of the population. Like there are certain individuals, usually the very high functioning 100-hour work week people who that works for, but definitely not the majority of the population.
We're social animals, and as such, as Matt said, we should be altruistic, and not just strive for an individual like goal of success for whatever that means.
Yeah, and the whole thing, I suppose, is you have to strike a balance between rewarding individual merit without those rewards being so large to the extent that they damage the collective merit or collective fabric.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, it's true. And even the seeking an ideology is another, like that's what you were talking about, where they're looking for these various groups. I think it's people are seeking ideologies and group membership because, as you say, they've been told that they're a Superman, Superwoman individual, right?
Yeah,
the brightest star in the sky.
I think Matt, that's a nice place to wrap it up.
Absolutely.
It's just coming up to an hour. We usually do like
40 minutes to an hour.
So it's not too bad.
Perfect.
It's not too bad. And thank you so much for coming on. It's a great episode.
Yeah,
Really
fantastic
enjoyed
discussion.
myself.
Oh, thank you guys. I had a blast. As soon as I heard the first episode of your show, I was like, okay, I'm talking to these guys. Like, I have a lot to say. Loved the two-parter on the apocalypse, eh? That's the one I wanted to come on for. So
Yeah, you said.
but I had a blast. I yelling at my earbuds listening to that one. So be sure to check out and subscribe to this show, everybody.
Thanks, man. If they've made it this far.
Yeah. Do you want to give a final shout out to your own show, and then we'll get out of here. We'll sign off.
Yeah, for sure. Type in semi-intellectual musings, 3 words, into any podcatcher that you might use. We're most active on Twitter, so just follow us there, at @the_SIM_POD. And if you find me on Facebook, I'm probably going to friend you because I'm shameless like that. So
He did it to me straight away, don't worry.
yeah, I was like, when I saw Seamus, I was like, oh man, please be from Ireland. Please be from Ireland.
Gotta get my Irish
Yes.
photo. Gotta get...
Nailed it.
Yeah, totally.
Right, listen, at the end of the day, it's night.
If you were sick, you wouldn't be well.
Talk to you now, guys. Thanks very much.